Hello everyone and welcome to your Premier Injuries International Injury Roundup. Now try saying that after a few beers. Anyway, lots to get through. The easiest and probably the best way is to go alphabetically, team by team, and I'll pick up on some of those key injury talking points from the last 3 to 4 days. So without any further ado, we'll kick off with Arsenal. And if you missed it, Thomas Partey wasn't involved for Ghana last time out. Chris Hughton referenced a small injury that wasn't worth taking any risks with. That kept the midfielder out of that game against Angola. Now, he will be fully assessed on his return to London. Currently, there's no word again as to the precise nature of that, but he's an early doubt for this weekend's matches. Elsewhere within that Gunners squad, in case you missed it, Takahiro Tomiyasu, he had underwent knee surgery following that injury that he picked up in the Europa League. Unfortunately, that's going to end his campaign. And also, we're still waiting for some kind of definitive update on William Saliba. We know that it was a back problem, a lower back issue that forced him off during the opening exchanges of that game against Sporting. Now, Mikel Arteta said that he would be going for further tests and evaluations on the Monday, but we've had nothing official. Reports from France suggest that it could be several weeks before the centre-back does return to action. For Aston Villa, we've seen Matty Cash limp off for Poland in their first international. Thankfully, post-match evaluations and an MRI scan reveal that the problems with the soleus, that's the calf muscle, to the layman, to you and I, and thankfully it doesn't look to be too serious, so just a minor strain in there. Now, the Polish FA state that they would expect Matty Cash to be back on the training pitches in and around several days, so that probably calls into question his availability in the first match of that double game week, but potentially there's a return against Leicester a few days later. For Chelsea, we've got a massive list going on here and a few potential returners. Kai Havertz is one of the latest additions to that Chelsea treatment boot, but thankfully this isn't injury related. This is more of an illness that released him from that German camp, and while we can never give any kind of definitive recovery times just due to the very nature of the player responses and the atypical virus, it certainly is good news within the fact that it isn't a muscle problem or an injury that he's picked up. Mason Mount, he's hoping to be in a much better place from the information that we've had from Graham Potter and his subsequent withdrawal from that England squad. This is a pelvic related issue. Now, reading between the lines, it does look like it's an overloading problem there. So that's why he's been eased back, and that's why that inflammation is causing the problems around him, maybe stepping up his recovery and his rehab and not able to give any kind of definitive, again, return to play. So fingers crossed, but he shouldn't be too far away. We also seen Edouard Mendy back on the training pitches before the break, so he should be in a good place. Also, Raheem Sterling, that hamstring problem kept him out of duty for the Three Lions. Again, shouldn't be too far away. Wesley Fofana, he was another question mark. He came off late last time out. That hamstring-related issue looks to be more of a precautionary measure, hopefully just a little bit of fatigue. So again, game week 29, can it be ruled out for him? And also, finally, Reece James, of course, his season has been hampered throughout due to numerous injuries and setbacks. We've had a couple of niggling problems in recent times as well. Nothing too serious. And this one, again, Gareth Southgate said that Reece just wasn't feeling 100%, had a little bit of a problem or an issue in that hamstring. But what he did say is he thinks that players just being a little bit more precautionary or protective of that area because of the injuries that ruled him out of the World Cup final. So fingers crossed again that that's not going to be too serious. For Leeds United, of course, they're battling for their top flight status, and we've had a couple of big injury updates from the Leeds camp. First and foremost, confirmation that Tyler Adams, who tweaked his hamstring prior to game week 28 in training, now he's undergone surgery on that hamstring problem. Now that's likely to end his campaign, although again we've had no official word of that. Wilfried Gnonto, he was replaced early doors for Italy last time out. Now, Roberto Mancini post-match said it was a sprain in that ankle. Again, the severity of which was yet to be determined. So there's certainly a big red flag over his availability for next game for Leeds. And also Max Vuba, Played in that first qualifying game for Austria, but was omitted from the squad altogether. A hamstring issue, although it's thought not to be anything too serious. We certainly expected to keep him out of game week 29 and possibly maybe even game week 30 with that. But like I say, hopefully it shouldn't be too long. For Leicester, again, their ever-growing injury list. And now we have Harry Souttar added to that. Picked up a knock in that first game for Australia. After discussions with the medical team and Harry, it was felt that it would be best if he returned to his club for treatment. So he will be one that will be getting heavily assessed and treated ahead of this week's end's fixtures. Elsewhere within that Foxes squad, Johnny Evans struggling with a hamstring, probably hasn't been able to play for the Republic of Ireland. Wout Faes, fortunately, he returns after serving a one-match ban. Victor Christiansen is another one who could potentially return. Wasn't quite fit enough to join up with the Denmark squad, but should be there or thereabouts in terms of being injury-free, although, of course, the ankle problem is meant that he'd probably lack just a little bit of sharpness. Now, across to Liverpool, we've seen Luis Diaz back in full training for Liverpool. Of course, he's been sidelined for several months due to back-to-back knee injuries, one which did result in him going under the knife. Thankfully, his recovery and rehab process seems to be going really, really well, and he was back with the first team in full training from this week. So, again, maybe pushing to be included in that matchday squad, but of course, you need to be aware that he's going to be severely lacking any kind of sharpness or match fitness. So minutes likely to come from the bench. Elsewhere within that Liverpool squad, Costino Tsimikas, he came off early doors for Greece in and around that 23rd to 24th minute on Monday. That was a bang to the ribs. Hopefully, again, that's just a bit of a precautionary measure. Nothing too serious there, but again, he needs to be assessed. That's less than 24 hours since that happened, so that's why we don't have any kind of clear diagnosis on that. And also would expect or hope that Darwin Núñez will recover from that knock that he picked up at the Bernabeu, second leg tie against Real Madrid, which kept him out of the internationals. Now across to Manchester City and Phil Foden. That's been the big talking point in recent teams. I'll touch upon Erling Haaland in a minute, but Phil Foden has went in appendectomy. He's had his appendix removed. A lot of questions with regards to how long before Phil Foden will be back in action. Of course, difficult to give any kind of definitive time frame for that, but typically I had a look through the database, and everybody that's went under similar procedures, we would typically expect a return in and around maybe 32 to 38 days. So maybe around that sort of 5 to potentially 6 weeks mark. So, you know, maybe the beginning of May for Phil Foden. Elsewhere, touched upon it, Erling Haaland. He was sent for a scan just after joining up with the Norwegian squad, and that was because of the groin issue. That imaging revealed a slight problem in there that ruled him out of those qualifying matches, and that was a huge blow for the team. And we always talk about international injuries, but we need to contextualize this in the grand scheme of things. And Erling Haaland is not a player that will typically like to mix matches. Pep Guardiola is not somebody who would have the power over that national team boss to state that he didn't want Haaland to play because he needs to keep him fit. So there is an underlying issue here. Players need to be assessed independently. National team bosses need to make that decision. Otherwise, they could potentially, players or clubs, face FIFA ramifications and potentially suspensions. So like I say, club managers cannot withdraw players themselves. The national team bosses must be in agreement with that, typically with their backroom staff, medical departments, and so on and so forth. So that's a roundabout way of saying that Erling Haaland, there is actually an issue there. And comments from his father suggest, again, that he may be doubtful, certainly for a start, for when those fixtures resume. Across the city to rivals Manchester United, a couple of updates. Marcel Sabitzer picked up a knock in his knee in Austria's first qualifying match, and he was an unused substitute. However, prior to that second game, Ralf Rangnick did suggest that it was more of a minor issue. So there's fingers crossed and hope that it was more of a precautionary measure, that he wasn't involved. Anthony Martial should return to the team. And Marcus Rashford, we've also seen as well, back in light training, working outside on an individual basis. So hopefully if he can come through those various protocols and step up his recovery, he may be back with the squad towards the back end of week. And of course, that would put him in contention for the trip to St. James's Park on Sunday. Alejandro Garnacho, again, picked up that injury before the break, just in case you missed out. Erik ten Hag does expect the Argentine to return before the end of the season. That's an ankle ligament problem. For Newcastle, again, lots of updates here. It looks like Anthony Gordon is responding really well to treatment. Eddie Howe said that was maybe an outside chance of him returning on that in game week 29 straight after that international break. And as it currently stands, like I say, you can't rule out the possibility of that. He should really be there or thereabouts. Joe Linton returns after serving a 2-match ban. Nick Pope withdrawn from international duty. That was more of a minor issue, so he should be fine. And also Sven Botman was one of the 5 Dutch players released from the squad for that first leg game after what they believed to be a dodgy chicken curry. He wasn't involved for the Dutch on Monday, whereas Gakpo was. But like I say, we do expect him to be available for Newcastle. Now, Nottingham Forest, we're in danger here of having to create our own injury table for Forest, who currently have 14 players listed on the sidelines. Now, we do expect 1 or 2 of those players to return this weekend, but some of the big updates ahead of their game. Andre Ayew, probably the most unusual injury of this international break, slipped in the change room and hurt his knee. He returned to the club for assessments. He sent for an MRI scan to determine the precise nature and what's going on with that. But again, looks to be an early doubt. Brennan Johnson failed to join up with the Welsh squad. That relates to that groin problem that he picked up in game week 27. He was cleared, surprisingly, to face Newcastle in game week 28. I think he did manage to play 90 minutes. However, he was unable to join up with the Welsh squad with that. Elsewhere within that Forest squad, Chris Wood, he took up that bang. He wouldn't have been able to play against Newcastle anyway, being his parent club. But of course, Steve Cooper said it was that bang to the thigh from the match before that he picked up just after coming on as sub, would have kept him out of the game. And that also kept him out of those recent internationals. For Southampton, Jan Bednarik went into the break as a slight concern, having attended a hospital visit, taking a whack to the ribs. It was initially believed that he may have suffered a fracture. He was cleared. It was heavy bruising, and he has played back-to-back 90 minutes for their concerns over Shea Adams, released from the Scottish squad due to a tightness in his calf. So again, he's one that will need to be assessed. Tottenham have confirmed that Emerson Royal has undergone knee surgery. That's a mesenectomy, a meniscus problem that he picked up playing for Brazil. Now that probably locks in Pedro Porro on the right-hand side, that right wing-back role under Christian Stellini. Whether Emerson Royal will return this season remains to be seen. Initial timelines suggest that we're looking at around about 6 to 8 weeks, so he does really face a race against time to be back. I suspect it may come too soon. We're not expecting Ben Davies back until later in April. However, there's better news with regards to Richarlison, who is said to be targeting a return on Monday. Hugo Lloris has played in a behind closed doors friendly, but again, whether Christian Stellini decides to recall his skipper or continue with Fraser Forster, who has proved himself to be an able deputy in his absence. For West Ham, we had Vladimir Sufal. We know that he's been managing an ongoing painful foot condition, plantar fasciitis, but he did play in the Czech Republic's first qualifying match, around about 70 minutes before following that up with another 90-minute run out. So that's good news for the Hammer, particularly during this run-in period where you've got some big games. Elsewhere, quick roundup of some other injuries. We had Seamus Coleman, who went into the international camp with a slight muscle problem. That was a thigh muscle issue. He was cleared. That's absolutely fine. I mentioned Cody Gakpo. He recovered from that food poisoning to manage 45 minutes for the Dutch squad. And I'm sure I've pretty much covered everything else to the best of my knowledge, although There might be one or two that you still want to know about. So you can always hit me up at Ben Dinnery or Jason_R_McKenna, or you can always check out the PremierInjuries.com injury table for all of the latest news and injury updates. That's me done.